everyone, Ashley Mailloux here with the Daily Racing Form. I'm going to look at a race this Saturday at Belmont Park. Now, there's not just one race at a mile and a half. There is another. That's race number 6, the Brooklyn Grade 2 event, as I mentioned, mile and a half on the main track. And we'll take a look at this field of older horses in general. And it's a huge field, 11 runners in here. Yes, there's some long shots in here that find themselves in an interesting spot. But then there's some of the bigger names in here, such as Next, Warrant, Lone Rock, even Calibrate is some of them, and other horses that are going to be interesting, such as the number 2 Red Run and the 4 Bright Future. So 11 betting interest, not all the time that you see this money, especially going this distance of a mile and a half. We'll start with the number 1, Portos. This one has recently joined the barn, of Tom Morley, and his 4th last time out in the Excelsior over that muddy track going a mile and an eighth. Now, he did actually make up some ground in there, and I thought he had a little bit of a closing kick. Now he's going to stretch out to a mile and a half, and just looking at his races in the past, he has gone long. He's actually gone a mile and 3/4 in the Birdstone at Saratoga back in July of 2022. He raced in the Brooklyn last year, was 4th in that event, which only drew a field of 7. And you can kind of see, looking at last year's division, some of the horses that he faced, such as Fearless and Ball Harbor, in some of his races, just, those sorts of names. And Fearless was pretty good in 2022. And Trevor McCarthy was aboard him in the Excelsior, is going to stay with him. I think he's still going to need to improve, though. It's been a while since he's found the winner's circle. The number 2 Red Run. This one out of the Mike Maker barn. Comes out of the Isaac Murphy Marathon at Churchill back on May 3rd and was a really game second. He only had a couple horses beaten early on in that compact field, but I thought he made a really nice late bid in there. He was second behind Warrant. He did finish in front of Next. These are horses he's obviously going to face again in the Brooklyn, and he just seems to be on the improve. He was claimed for 50,000. He raced very well going a mile, and they took a chance with him, stretching him out to a mile and a half, probably thinking he's got that closing running style. And he raced very well in his most recent effort. The number 3, Alfeo. This is a long shot. Louis Sy is going to climb aboard this horse coming in from Ohio. You can see a lot of starts at Mahoning Valley, and more recently, those 2 efforts at Thistle Down, which were both impressive victories, but they were at the allowance level of non-winners of 2 life and non-winners of 3 life. So this is a horse who, at one point in his career, you could have claimed him for 15,000 and even 10,000, which is where he was picked out of for his new connections. And he was a 9-length winner last time out, but in terms of figures, he's going to need to improve. He's been forwardly placed in those efforts. He's going to stretch out to a mile and a half. There's a lot of question marks around this horse, and that's why he's 50 to 1 on the morning line. The number 4, Bright Future. He's a horse that seems to be getting a bit better with each of his starts. He was able to graduate at first asking in March of 2022 at Gulfstream Park. We didn't see him for a few months. We saw him at Belmont. He was 3rd in that first level allowance. And then we didn't see him again until April of this year. He was able to win once again at Gulfstream Park. They took him to Churchill in his most recent effort. And a very different trip for him. You look at his other efforts, he was pretty close to the pace early on, and he was shuffled further back. He got a big field at Churchill as well, 12 runners. He was kind of mid-pack, but he did make a nice late run in there, and that was going a mile, and the pace set up for him. They did go 45 and 1 to the half, so it's going to be interesting. He's never gone further than a mile, and you look at his races, those are 1-turn miles, so interesting to see the connections put him here. He's working well, though. Those workouts at Churchill, and it's Todd Pletcher and Arad Ortiz teaming up 4 to 1 here on the morning line. The number 5 Next, we'll take a look at his most recent win in the Grade 2 Thoroughbred Aftercare Alliance on a Breeders' Cup weekend at Keeneland. You can't miss him here. He is the gray in the front, and he was in the front throughout here, set very reasonable fractions for this distance, and was able to draw clear here under Luan Machado, who's going to stay with him and has kind of been with him his last several efforts. And he ends up being much the best in here. Haywood's Beach ends up being second. I mentioned the name earlier. Ball Harbor is going to round out the trifecta, and I just thought he looked very good. Keeneland, he seems to, got along really well at the surface, which was in great contrast when he went 7/8 there. And then more recently, he was also in the Isaac Murphy Marathon. We saw him. He did fade in there, though, to finish 3rd behind Warrant and Red Run. We'll move on to the number 6, Forewarned. This one of the Uriah St. Louis barn. A 12-time winner in his career. He's been a hard-knocking son of Flat Out. He's 8 years old now. In his last couple efforts, they've been putting him all kind of around the East Coast. He's been at Parks, Aqueduct, Laurel. He was able to win at Parks, going a mile and 70 yards, and then his last 2, he's gone a mile and an eighth, both over and off track. And he didn't really fare too well. He was 3rd, though, in the Native Dancer. Ended up being a pretty strong outfield. It was won by Nimitz class, and it's been a while since we've seen him going a mile and a half. He's an interesting horse. I just think we look at his form, and he's just shy of $1 million in purse earnings, and he's about $750 or so to get that mile marker kind of tracked off his list. But I wonder if with him, his best races at this kind of level of competition might be in the past. But he's only had those 2 tries in a mile and a half, yet to be in the money. The number 7 Warrant, 5-2 on the morning line. This one trained by Brad Cox, a 5-year-old son of Constitution, who we mentioned one last time out in that race that we keep on referring to at Churchill. But we'll take a look at the performance 2 back in the Temperance Hill at Oaklawn Park. He's part of that pace scenario in that race, going a mile and a half. And in the end here, Flavian Prad is, calling upon him. There's a couple horses to point out. He's the 4, the 6 is Lone Rock, as well as the number 5 Calibrate, who ends up getting the job done. And you can see this horse he was kind of on the rail. Everyone was on the outer side of the track, and he just did not have that punch that he needed. The other 2 were moving better in the stretch and got the setup that they needed. But it was nice to see him come back to win next time out with a 97 Beyer speed figure. And it was his first win since that race at Fairgrounds in January. And then you go further back. It had been a while since you had to find the next one, which was in the Grade 3 Oklahoma Derby. But he's been a consistent type throughout his career. We haven't seen him too much in 2022 and 2023, but he's progressing in the right direction. I mentioned has that confidence boosting win last time out. Move on to the number 8, Lone Rock, who's another one that's been fun to watch in his career. He's another 8-year-old in the field. He's 16 for 44 lifetime, earnings of just over $1.4 million. Now, he did not fire at all at Churchill and just didn't show up at all, but he was a nice second in the Temperance Hill. And you go down his past performances, and I know we've only seen him 2 times since July of 2022, but he's fired off some really big races. Belmont has been a very kind surface to him. He's yet to miss the board from 3 attempts. He was able to win the Brooklyn in 2021 by over 11 lengths, and he's part of that early pace scenario. But the thing I like about him, and he doesn't show it all the time, but he has shown the ability to sit just off the pace and make a late move and pass horses. I know that is not the case if you go maybe say 3 races ago and further down, but you can find that form. His form's a little muddied in some regard and typically just getting those minor checks. But I think 3rd off the layoff, he could be sitting on a huge effort. He's going to get a new rider today of Javier Castellano. The number 9, Calibrate, now moves to the barn of Jamie Ness, was in the Cody Rosen barn, was 5th last time out in that same key race that everyone seems like they're coming out of at Churchill. And this was the winner of the Temperance Hill, and he looked really good in the stretch there at Oaklawn Park. It was a step up for him. He won at odds of 30-1. You can see he's kind of been all over the place. Prairie Meadows, Canterbury Park, even Hawthorne in some of his races. So really you have to key in on that effort at Oaklawn Park, and you look at that and you say, well, he's beat a lot of runners that are in this field. But he did disappoint last time out, training well, though, now quite well at Parks. The number 10, Centavo. This is a long shot in here. He was a 6 1/4 length winner last time out, going a mile and a 16th. He is cross-ended in another race. He's a claiming horse. He would really need to step up to get an upset in here for me. I think I don't see it. I can't see it on paper, a situation where he wins this race. Then rounding out the field is the number 11, Code Runner, another long shot in here. Looking at some of his races, he raced okay at a mile and a quarter at Turfway Park on the synthetic, faced a big field there in that allowance optional claiming event and ended up finishing 3rd, beaten by 2 1/4. He's run well in the past too on the dirt, but you have to go back to find his last win, October of 2021 at Keeneland. He was in for the $32,000 tag. He's another one that I think it's tough to make a case for him in here, and he also draws to the outside in post 11. So big field, though, in the Grade 2 Brooklyn. And I was torn. I mean, I think if you go through these past performances for a race going a mile and a half, you can make cases. You can maybe say last out. You can go 3 or 4 or 5 races back. It makes it a really challenging race to handicap. I ultimately went to the number 5 next. Looking at this horse's race that we saw at Keeneland in the Grade 2 Thoroughbred Aftercare Lions Stakes race, I thought he was very impressive. Even before that, took on a field at Delaware Park. He's going to be part of that pace scenario. Whether he makes the lead easy in here, I'm not sure. But he's just going to make now his 2nd start since that Grade 2 event where he was able to win. And I think he needed that race at Churchill. So I'm going to use him in here on top, 3-1 on the morning line. The number 2, Red Run. I think he's extremely intriguing, just looking how he raced at Churchill last time. You go down the page and look at his races. He had gone long on the turf, but he hadn't gone a mile and a half on the dirt. And to me, that was a huge performance. And I think Mike Maker can even make him probably move up in here. He's got a little bit more familiarity with this runner. And I think he's a nice horse here at a decent price of 6-1. Then I went to Lone Rock. always been a hard knocking type who I've always been a big fan of. And I think he's another one that third start off the layoff, we see room for improvement. And he's been known to show up in a big way on some of these big days. And I mentioned it when I talked about him specifically. The one thing I like is that he can be close to the pace and pass horses. That was a big selling point for me on him. Then I rounded out with the 5-2 morning line favorite of the number 7 Warrant. Very impressive last time out in the Temperance Hill. He just tired a little bit in there. You know, if he runs his most recent race, he could be tough in here, but I just thought the price was short. And in this race, I think there were other horses that just I found a little bit more intriguing. So for me, I went the 5 on top as my top pick, that being Next. Good luck here in the Brooklyn.